Skoda Kamiq launched a few years ago and since then has become a well-established player in the compact crossover arena. But can a new engine and the revival of a much-loved trim level raise its game even further? Now this specific Kamiq is the Monte Carlo, and don't worry motorsport fans, Skoda are not about to take this thing rallying. However, Skoda have rallied in the past and saw big success at the Monte Carlo rally. It was introduced as a trim level on previous generations of Fabia and it proved popular. And it might just be the pick of the bunch in terms of trims and trinkets for this car. The Kamiq Monte Carlo is picked out from its lesser siblings by things like gloss black where there used to be chrome. That's for things like the grille, the roof bars and little lips around the car. Probably most notably the 18-inch Vega alloy wheels. These things look great. They're just about the right proportions for this car. They're not too big, they're not too small. Of course the diamond cutting on them just looks absolutely sensational with the black contrast. And then who can forget the obligatory smattering of Monte Carlo badging. There's plenty more to the Monte Carlo trim on the inside, but that's about it for the exterior. Now this specific car is finished in an optional race blue, which I think looks great against the contrasting black elements of the car. And generally the car's quite chiseled look gives it a sense of purpose without looking too OTT like some of its rivals. A pleasantly sophisticated machine that isn't all about seeking attention. Open the door of the Kamiq and the first thing you'll notice are those great big bolstered sport seats with red trim. They're pretty showy, and whilst this car doesn't really have any sporting credentials, they do set a tone for the cabin. But more importantly than looking sporty in a car like this, they're actually pretty comfortable over longer distances. Monte Carlo cars also come with a digital cockpit, a large 9.2-inch touchscreen display, and a full-length glass panoramic roof that lets plenty of natural light into the cabin. The interior has that typically Skoda well-built, hardy, durable feel, which is really important for a family car that may have to deal with younger children. Monte Carlo cars are actually based on SEL trim, which means it comes loaded with plenty of standard equipment that represents relatively good value in that specification. Things like cruise control come as standard, however, parking sensors remain optional. An option box definitely worth ticking on every Skoda is the Simply Clever pack that adds a whole series of gadgets and gizmos that just make your life easier. The sorts of things that make you think, why hasn't anybody thought of this before? A hidden ice scraper within the fuel cap for those times when you forget yours. A deployable torch in the boot that actually serves as one of the boot lights. Now it might sound really dull, but one of my favourites is actually the washer fluid cap that opens up into a funnel to stop you spilling windscreen wash all over the place. Practicality is really good in the Kamiq, with rear passengers getting plenty of head and legroom thanks to its nice boxy rear proportions. However, middle passengers do have to deal with a notable transmission hump. Boot space is an excellent 400 litres and it's a nice square loading area, making it easier to load bulkier items. Skoda also knows the value of chunky curry hooks to stop your shopping from flying all over the boot. Now this Skoda Kamiq is actually loaded with a brand new engine option, a 1.5 litre petrol TSI engine. And when the Kamiq launched a few years ago, it launched with a really gutsy 3-cylinder turbocharged engine and it punched well above its weight. Really lovely, refined, plenty of power for the size of engine, and it was really a perfect fit for this compact SUV. This 1.5 litre is sort of the same unit that you'd find in the latest Volkswagen Golf, and it certainly gives it a bit more guts. Not that the previous one was lacking, but the additional torque that this delivers is really bountiful. So it's 148 brake horsepower, 250 newton meters of torque, and yeah, it's not the fastest thing in the world, 0 to 62 in 8.3 seconds, but generally speaking, in day-to-day operation, the additional torque is really noticeable. Come across a dawdler doing 50 in a 70, it doesn't take much to get this car up to a gallop and dispose of them. Another really nice trait of this engine is that torque is available from pretty low in the rev range, and that means that mechanical shove is accessible to you more readily. And whilst that's great for motorway trawling, it also serves it pretty well around town, because things like junctions and roundabouts, when you need to really make a positive manoeuvre, the car is there. Now it sends power through to the front wheels in this specification via a 6-speed manual transmission, and just like everything else in the cabin, it's got a really nice solid durable motion to it, a little notchy in places, but actually it's not a bad gearbox at all. It's really well ratioed for both around town and longer legged journeys on the motorway. Now, as you've probably already predicted from a compact SUV, this car is not about driver engagement or handling or any of those things that get enthusiasts excited. It's about being compact and stylish and, you know, just an ideal sort of family car, and it ticks those boxes very well. You could say rivals such as the Ford Puma certainly handle better than this car. The steering is accurate but totally devoid of feel. There's not very much of a sense of connection between what the wheels are doing and the steering wheel. Though body roll is impressively well controlled for a car that sits up this high. Refinement overall is pretty good. Okay, around town, going over speed bumps and sort of low speed impacts with road imperfections, that's when you get a bit of a thud and a judder through the cabin. But generally the ride improves the faster you go. There's a little bit of road noise that creeps into the cabin, and I lay the blame squarely at those 18-inch alloy wheels. But generally it's a really nice, really refined sort of car. And I think when you stop going, oh, that's a nice feature, or oh, it does that really well, that's the mark of a good design. When you start just taking a car for granted. I've had this for about a week now and it's clicked into my life pretty well. And you jump in it and you do your job and it does its job and all is well. It's nice when cars have gimmicks and this, that and the other, and you could argue that maybe other cars have a bit more charisma than this. But for the majority of people, you just want a car to do its job really well, and that's what the Kamiq does. Now, I know there's a very vocal group of people out there who will never have an SUV, and to varying degrees, I totally agree. I'd rather have a hatchback or an estate car than a high-riding, heavier SUV. But the world we live in is that the customer gets what the customer wants, and right now the customer wants SUVs. And a few years ago, they were sort of rushed to market. It was a very, particularly these compact SUVs, it was a case of keeping up with the Joneses. Today, manufacturers pour a lot more time, energy and money into developing these cars, to the point where, okay, whilst they're at a disadvantage handling-wise for being so tall or a bit heavier than their counterparts, the problem has been engineered around, and what you have now is a really competent package from a good group of them. And I think in terms of compact SUVs that I genuinely hand on heart recommend, the Kamiq is right up there. A key characteristic of the Kamiq is just a really sure-footed feel to the way it drives. Whilst this model's only front-wheel drive, there's an abundance of grip available, and as mentioned, body roll is well controlled, so there's a competence to the way that it goes down the road, and that's really nice. In a family car, you want that security. You obviously get a slightly more fortified sense of driving, I suppose, being sat up a bit higher than other cars, and that's part of the allure of an SUV. But yeah, I think as a machine to drive, both around town and commuting on the motorway, this 1.5 litre Kamiq is a really good all-rounder. When there's a choice between the 1 litre engine or this 1.5, it basically comes down to how you're going to use the car. That punchy little 1 litre is a fantastic engine, and it doesn't feel out of its depth on the motorway at all. But this 1.5 has a slightly more long-legged nature to it, and I think if you're doing, you know, substantial motorway journeys, then this bigger engine might be for you. Skoda claims that this car will do between 42 and 46 mpg, and considering I'm hitting 40 mpg without really trying, those figures are totally believable. If you fancy a Kamiq Monte Carlo with this engine, it starts from £25,350. Head to YesAuto.com for the latest car news and reviews, and don't forget to check us out on social media. We're in all the usual places such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Simply search for YesAuto.